look, listen, I know you don't need to mention it. I know I look like complete and utter shit right now, okay? Look, my face decided that it wanted to be covered in spots today. It decided it was just gonna have a complete fucking outburst of them. Don't mention it, okay? Leave me alone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new 21 Pilots album, Breach, their 8th studio album, as well as the final album in their 10-year storyline lore bullshit, which means it's time to stop and rank all 8 of their albums tier list style. I'm going to be going in chronological order from their 2009 self-titled all the way up to Breach, and only including full-length 21 Pilots albums. No fun intended is going to be included on this album. We're not going to be including the MTV Unplugged, just the 21 Pilots studio albums. Also, if you like this video, you can check out reactions to Trench, Clancy, as well as Breach. You know, they will all be in a 21 Pilots video playlist at the end of this video. With that being said, let's get started. Their self-titled album, released in 2009. This album is honestly, surprisingly, a pretty solid opener to their discography. It has plenty of really great ideas. I think that the performances across the board are super solid as well. And I think this album does benefit greatly from being their most genre-definite album. It is just a straight piano rock album for the most part, obviously with more electronic influences, with some indie pop influences throughout it as well. But having kind of a consistent through line for the sound of this album, instead of it being a whole bunch of genres just being fused together into an overall alt-pop sound, definitely does make this thing feel a little more sonically cohesive. Now, I will say the execution of said great ideas that I mentioned a minute ago is a little hit and miss on this project. Plenty of great piano ballads land on this album, like Implicit Demand for Proof, Addict with a Pen, and Taxi Cab. More theatric cuts like Friend Please, Aircatcher, and Trapdoor serve as some of the punchiest songs in the band's early discography for me as well. But then you also get some really awkward moments on this album where I feel like the songwriting, Tyler Joseph's vocals, and even a lot of the structure and pacing of these tracks really falls short. Fall Away, The Pantaloon, and Johnny Boy range from annoying to utterly forgettable. And Before You Start Your Day stands as one of the worst songs in the band's discography, with some absolutely appalling lyricism, and the sonic palette is just so fucking bland on that track. I will say it comes to a decently strong conclusion with Isle of Flightless Birds. There's some like kind of cringe rapping moments, but I do think the overall imagery of that track is a really nice way to finish off this album. Yeah, this project is solid. It's surprisingly well produced for a debut album. I think that the performances across the board are genuinely quite gripping, and I think Tyler Joseph's songwriting does show a decent bit of promise on this project. So, all things considered, I would put self-titled up in the B tier.
I know where you stand, silence in the trees.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen, regional at best, everybody's favorite. Sounds really fucking bad. This album is so absolutely, utterly atrocious in every single regard. This is one of the biggest steps down between albums that I have ever seen. Like, self-titled is good, self-titled is fun, it's like a 7 out of 10, and then this is just one of the sloppiest, most, like, unflattering pieces of work I have ever seen. A true disaster piece of an album that doesn't even provide a single like shining moment outside of like 2 songs. Forest and Glowing Eyes are genuinely enjoyable tracks that I feel like reinvigorate the color into the band, that I feel like show Tyler Joseph being a much more competent performer than the rest of the tracks, and I think the writing on those 2 songs is really solid as well. But outside of that, everything just sounds so terrible on this album, dude. All of the songs that would end up on Vessel just sound like complete shit here. You get more synth-based tracks like The Back Half of Car Radio or Ode to Sleep, where all of the synth sounds, all of the electronics just sound dated even for the time that the album came out. All of the well-rounded edge that I feel like you get on Vessel is just completely stripped away on this album. It just lacks any of that sauce or flavor that I feel like they would bring on that album. Not to mention the complete butchering of a song like Trees. Look, I know the regional at best version obviously existed before the Vessel version, but the fact that they can make a song that should be that easy of a win sound this horrible, sound this tacky, sound this dated. It doesn't even sound dated. It doesn't sound like there's any time period that this version of Trees could come out where it sounds like it would fit that era. All of the choices in terms of the vocal effects, in terms of the mixing, are just, they're baffling. They're actually baffling. And I think the majority of the songs unique to this album are just so forgettable as well. You get like Be Concerned featuring that one guy who brings such a forgettable vocal performance. You get a song like Clear or Ruby that just don't stand out in any way, shape, or form. Also, I didn't mention this when talking about self-titled, but it just clocked in my head that it's something I should talk about. So this applies to both albums, but the pacing here is absolutely atrocious. This thing is over an hour long, and it does not deserve to go anywhere above the 35-minute mark. Regional at best lands itself in the F tier, easily the band's worst work, and thankfully, we don't have to worry about it getting any worse from here. Vessel is essentially Regional at best, but better. This album carries over a lot of the same tracks that Regional at best had, just redone with better production and way better performances and track placement. Just as the first point of comparison that comes to mind, Regional at best opens with Guns for Hands, and this album opens with Ode to Sleep. I feel like it's pretty obvious that Ode to Sleep is your opener and not Guns for Hands. Also, the updated mixes of these songs are just a million times better. Look, I'm gonna be honest, they're not that good. They still sound incredibly dated, even for 2013, but they are an absolute godsend in comparison to Regional at best. The back half of Car Radio gets completely saved. Trees is the biggest step up of a song imaginable, and even tracks like Ode to Sleep, Holding On To You, and Guns for Hands find so much more punch and staying power on this album due to their updated mixes as well. This is also the album where we got the lineup change. No more Chris Salley, no more Nick Thomas, and we now have Josh Dunn on the drums, making the band a two-piece moving forward. And I'm going to be completely honest, that is the best change they could have made. Tyler Joseph is already a multi-instrumentalist, so he's got piano, bass, ukulele, fucking everything covered. And Josh Dunn is just a far more interesting drummer than Chris Salley, in my opinion. Maybe missing a little bit of the subtleties that Chris Salley brings, but I feel like Josh Dunn has a lot of power that brings so much pizzazz, so much pop to these tracks that I feel like Chris Salley was just kind of missing. We also get a handful of new songs on this album, the best of which being Semi-Automatic and Fake You Out for me. Both of them just stand as some of the most memorable songs in the band's early catalogue, with some of the most fun synthetic work, some of the most fascinating lyricism. And it's those tracks that make this album stand out from Regional at best and not just feel like a rehash of their album, just literally doing an updated version of the exact same project. But you also get some misses on this album, like The Run and Go, which stands as maybe my least favorite song in the band's catalog, excluding Regional at best Trees, because, you know, you get an updated version of that on this album anyway. That song gives me a headache every single time I listen to it. The kicks are so loud, the piano stabs are so obnoxious, and Tyler Joseph's vocals are just absolutely unbearable on that track. It's so fucking bad, it's like unforgivable. But yeah, I'd say this album's a decent success. It has production issues. I don't think every song is perfect. There's a handful of stinkers on here, but it does go miles and miles above Regional at best for me, which is why it lands itself in the B tier.
I wasn't raised in the hood, but I know a thing or two about pain and darkness.
Alright, we're on to the big one, ladies and gentlemen, Blurryface, the album that really put the band on the map. So many massive hits on this album: Stressed Out, Ride, Lame Boy, Tear in My Heart. Basically, the first 6 tracks on this album are the type of songs where you could show them all to any random person on the street and they'll probably recognize at least 2 or 3 of them. But do the massive numbers this album pulled mean it's actually good? Kind of. I think there's a handful of really solid cuts on this album. Heavy Dirty Soul is a very fun hip-hop rock-infused banger, even with some of the cringy bars throughout it. Stressed Out, despite being as overplayed and obnoxious as it can be, I do think it is a genuinely fun pop track that is able to pull out a lot of nostalgic feelings like the song is trying to achieve. And as you move into the back half, you get songs like Doubt, Message Man, and Ghana, which do stand as some of the most memorable songs in this era of the band easily. But this thing also has some incredibly glaring issues, the biggest one of which being Tyler Joseph's songwriting. As I mentioned when talking about Heavy Dirty Soul, a lot of the bars on that track are pretty fucking trash, and that is the case for most of this album because Tyler Joseph had his head up his ass a lot of the writing process of this album, apparently. On my mini review of this album that I put up on my shorts page and on my TikTok, I got a comment talking about like me misinterpreting the line on Lame Boy, saying I wasn't raised in the hood, but I know a thing or two about pain and darkness. The comment was like, oh, you don't understand, this song's genius, you just lack any reading comprehension. He's not talking about how he relates to black people, he's just saying that he doesn't need to be black to go through real struggle. And it's like, yeah, that's why the line is one of the worst lines of all time. It's such a shitty, stupid fucking comparison that doesn't make any sense if you think even the tiniest little bit about the line. This album also has some massive production issues. It is one of the most inconsistent sounding albums production wise. Like, you listen to Heavy Dirty Soul and The Judge and it does not feel like they belong on the same album, sonically or production wise, to be honest. This thing obviously had a whole bunch of producers working on it, and you can fucking tell. They chopped this thing up, reworked it, added in all of their own little flavors and flares to this, that it ends up feeling more like a chaotic mood board than an actual complete album. And it's for those reasons that while I don't think Blurryface is a bad album, it's definitely very meh, and it lands itself in the C tier. Alright, now we're on to Trench, ladies and gentlemen. This is the one I've been waiting for. Trench is an absolute masterpiece. I've told the story of how this is the album that got me into music a million times on this channel, so I'm not going to go through that again. But this is definitely the album that has stood its ground the best, despite me kind of growing a little bit distant from the band and my bias kind of slowly starting to fade from them. This project only really grows with me on every single listen. I think this is one of the best albums of the 2010s and a personal favorite of all time for me. Paul Meany is the best producer for this band possible. He is able to pull out sounds, he is able to create ideas, he is able to work these tracks in a way that genuinely elevates them to completely new heights. This album, even just on an aesthetic level, stands out so well among the rest of their discography. This thing is so murky, it's so mossy, it feels like there's such a sense of like a disgusting, like, ickiness to all of this, and I can't say that there's any feeling I get that strong out of any of their previous albums. This thing's dark, it's gritty, it's very emotional, and it's also, I feel like, the proper beginning of the band's lore. Like, Blurryface, it has references to the lore, but it feels more like the lore was thought of after, and it was kind of pulling elements from the album and saying, okay, we're gonna take this, we're gonna take this, we're gonna take this, and we're gonna build something out of it. And this album is the thing they built out of it. They took the ideas present on Blurryface and they said, okay, how can we make a story out of this? And they did that absolutely beautifully here. There's so many great character moments on this album, like Jumpsuit, Levitate, and Bandito, that really force you into the perspective of not only Tyler Joseph writing this album, but Clancy the character. And also so much fantastic world building, like on a song like Nico and the Niners, that just paints such a vivid image of the world you are being set into. Paul Meany's help on the writing front is also a massive, massive, massive boost for this band. I feel like he is able to kind of collaborate with Tyler Joseph in a way that boosts up his ideas so much to the point where this doesn't even feel like it's written by the same guy who wrote Vessel or Blurryface. There is such a maturity here, there is such a descriptiveness here, there is such a focus on the details that I feel like was not there on any previous project that makes this thing stand out in only good ways. Think about a song like Chlorine that is so focused on its imagery, that's so focused on the emotional details that you are just able to fully immerse yourself without worrying about any corny bars coming in, without worrying about any random switch ups, because the album has done such a good job with the first 4 tracks at setting a tone. Yeah, I don't have a single problem with this album. I feel like production wise it's one of their strongest, writing wise it is their strongest, full stop. Josh Dun and Tyler Joseph are both at peak performance here as well, and I just feel like the flow of this album is so satisfying. Like, this 56 minutes is coming up on an hour, but it goes by like that because you just get so immersed in this world. Trench is the easiest S tier ever. Absolutely fucking fantastic album and a beautiful standout in the 21 Pilots discography for me. Listen, I know Skeld and Icy gets a lot of shit, and honestly, kind of deservedly so. It's a big step down from Trench and a very weird direction for the band to take. But I do think it's a little better than people give it credit for, and it's certainly a far cry from the band's worst. This album, for the most part, is a collection of some fun pop rock tracks that serve as nice enough background music, which, you know, isn't exactly the highest praise, but it's better than what people give it credit for. You get songs like Good Day, Choker, Shy Away, Redecorate, which serve as genuinely very punchy tracks that still stick with me to this day, 4 years after the album came out. Solid songwriting, surprisingly pretty great production as well. I feel like people don't talk about how well produced this album is all that much. I also think there's some pretty strong imagery on this album as well. I'm not the biggest fan of the direction they take the lore on this album, with it being like demo propaganda for the sake of making shitty generic pop tracks, but I do think it allows for some nice vibrancy and color to be injected in this album that isn't really present on any of their previous projects. It's way more lighthearted, it's way more of a breezy listen than any of their other albums, only clocking in at 37 minutes. But it definitely does still have its issues. The midpoint of this album is an absolute slog. You get to the song Saturday and things start to take a bit of a nosedive, even though I think Saturday is an okay song. Never Take It is one of the worst songs the band have ever made, with those annoying ass high-pitched fucking falsetto backing vocals and then the clapping. Some of the worst writing on any of the band's songs, that it was able to be misinterpreted by fucking Trump supporters and they thought it was a song supporting their cause. That is how terrible this song is written. Mulberry Street is fine, it's a nice enough piano piece I suppose, but Formidable and Bounce Man are just genuinely horrible. Both tracks feel like just rainbow vomit, sunshine and lollipops and shit, done to such an immense degree that it gets grating. Look, I get that it's demo propaganda, it's meant to be a little brighter because they're forcing the band to make cheery pop songs and everything's meant to look okay when it's not, but it doesn't mean the album needs to sound like I'm watching an Illumination movie. Like, my patience wears so thin with the midpoint of this album. I don't return to any of the songs from track 6 to track 9. It is just absolutely unbearable. The album does pick itself back up with the final two, though. No Chances is a fun hip-hop track with some kind of goofy charm to it with how grand and over the top it is, and Redecorate definitely stands as one of the best closers the band have ever made, full stop. So yeah, while this is a very flawed album, and while I think it does have a lot of issues, I think I enjoy this more than most people, and I think most people, you know, they hate on it a little bit too much. They're kind of mean to this album. I would put it in the B tier. Alright, we are now on to 2024's Clancy, which is a big step up, but not the album I was expecting it to be honest. The singles made this feel a lot more like Trench, where it was a lot darker, it was a lot grander. Paul Meany back on the production definitely brought a lot more flavor and flair to this album than Mike Elizondo did on Scaled and Icy. But listening to the actual album itself, it felt more like an in-between point between the two albums, with some of the darker, grittier cuts, a little more of like that punk attitude, but a lot of songs that are just genuinely sweet, really well written pop songs. Midwest Indigo brings a nice little bit of pop, punk, and new wave flair to this album. Routines in the Night felt like it could have been an easy smash radio hit if it was released as a single, and Vignette brings a nice bit of color and levity to this album with those great falsetto vocals on the chorus. Then you also get songs like Navigating and Paladin Straight that kind of add the grandeur, kind of re-inject the lore aspects into the album, and kind of serve as a counterbalance to the more pop-centric cuts on the first half. Now, I do have one common problem with this album and Breach, and we'll get into it a little bit deeper when we get onto the next album, and it's that I think the two just needed a little bit more lore throughout the actual album itself. You get Overcompensate, Navigating, and Paladin Straight for songs that tie into the lore, and the rest of them, nothing. Maybe a handful of vague references here and there, but this album, for what was advertised at the time as the big finish to this story, has 3 songs that tie into the lore, and then besides that, you're just kind of left with more personal cuts, which is fine, obviously. It's okay for these songs to kind of be a little bit more based in reality, but come on, for an album that was advertised as the big finish, there's hardly any lore on this thing. It more feels like it's using vague ties to the lore to explore these feelings, which I feel like an album like Trench did, but way, way better, where that album was using the lore to explore a lot of deep themes, but it was actually part of the story. Here it just feels like it's like, oh wait, hold on, here's this feeling that I've had, and I guess I can kind of connect it to this, so we're kind of going to use this as a lens to vaguely, you know, explore this idea over here. It kind of just feels like there's such loose threads hanging all of these things together, and this album, despite me really enjoying it, can feel a little flimsy in terms of it being a concept album. That aside, I do think this album is genuinely great. It's one of the band's easiest listens. It's not quite as heady as Trench. It's not quite as brief and as forgettable as Scaled and Icy. And even at this album's worst, it's just okay. Like Lavish, Snapback, and Oldie Station are all songs that I feel like are fine, but not quite great, but they would never be skips when listening to the album front to back for me. So, with all that being said, I think Clancy lands itself up in the A tier, their second great album in my opinion. Alright, here we are, their latest full-length album, Breach. This album is a huge win in my opinion. A lot of similarities can be drawn between this album and Clancy. It definitely does feel like a middle ground between the sounds of multiple different albums, except this time it's even bringing in Vessel and Blurryface into the fold. It feels like a nice meeting point between what the band would do on their old projects and their kind of formula of their Vessel Blurryface era, with the updated writing, with the updated production of Trench and onwards. Paul Meany and Mike Elizondo both came together for production on this album, obviously with Tyler Joseph helping on the production as well, and I think that was a pretty genius choice because you're able to get the sounds of Blurryface, get the sounds of Scaled and Icy, and mix them with Paul Meany's ability to create something grander and more gritty. I think a song like City Walls is a perfect example of that, where that track is able to be very catchy, it's able to have a lot of bright tones throughout it, but then Paul Meany is able to bring so much of a serious, grounded nature to that track, and he really boosts Tyler Joseph's writing on that song as well, in my opinion. The Contract stands as one of the band's strongest singles, full stop. I think that song is perfect, one of the best songs of the year, and it also highlights probably my favorite thing about this album, and it's that the production is the best it's ever been on any of their albums. Paul Meany and Mike Elizondo are two very different producers with very different styles, but when they come together, that juxtaposition creates something really remarkable, in my opinion. Multiple mind-blowing points throughout this album that are so deeply layered, so densely packed with so many different ideas happening all at once that you would think it would be a little bit too much, but it never gets too big for its boots. It never feels like it crumbles under its own weight. This album has the songwriting, it has the performances, it has the pacing to be able to hold all of these things up. This is also absolutely Josh Dunn's album, dude. Multiple of his best recorded drum takes land across this thing, like Drum Show, like The Contract, like a song like Center Mass or Days Lie Dormant. He really gets to flex his muscles as a hip-hop drummer, as an alt-rock drummer, as a pop-punk drummer, as even at points just like a straight punk drummer as well. He is able to blend so many different styles of drumming, even into singular tracks at points, in a way that not only serves the song, but elevates them to completely new heights, which I think he was able to do before at points on previous albums, but is able to do on every single track on this album, besides Intention that doesn't have any drums, of course. Not to mention how incredible the flow on this album is. I know it's like the smallest little thing ever, but the band even add the detail of having multiple of the songs transition into each other throughout this thing, which we only got once before with Jumpsuit and Levitate, and that transition isn't even that good. Now, I do have minor gripes with this thing, of course, the lore aspect that I talked about with Clancy. This thing is not very lore heavy at all, besides City Walls, The Contract, and Intentions. And I feel like the inconsistent sonics that the band bring on every single album up to this point does get a little bit much at points here, like you'll get two songs back to back that sound like we're in just completely different albums. But I do think this is one of only two albums that they've made where every song is at the bare minimum great. I know I didn't like Downstairs all that much when I first heard the album, and I had robot voices and garbage at lower scores, but being multiple listens into this thing at this point, I think that every single song on this album is at the bare minimum great, and the band are able to bring so much fire and passion to every moment of this thing. This just feels like an album of pure passion, this feels like a complete creative overflow, and this feels like the band blending styles and genres in some of the most fun and creative ways they have up to this point. If this does end up being the band's last album, it's a hell of a send-off for them. I would easily put Breach up in the S tier. It's going to be a 9 out of 10 for me. Alright, now that we have the albums all tiered out, it's time to rank them within their individual tiers. Of course, last placed is going to be Regional at Best down in the F tier, number 7 is going to be Blurryface in C tier. Coming in at number 6, we are going to go Self-Titled at the bottom of B tier, then Scaled and Icy, then Vessel. Number 3, of course, is going to be Clancy in the A tier. Number 2, Breach in the S tier. And number 1, Trench. It's a 10 out of 10, top of S tier easily. And yeah, that is it for this 21 Pilots tier list. Let me know how you'd rank all their albums down below. I'd be fascinated to see what people's favorites are in this discography. I know a lot of people have bias towards their early discography. I know a lot of people hate their early discography and only really like the new stuff. So I'd be interested to see what the balance of people's favorite projects are and favorite eras of the band in general. Like and sub if you haven't. We are on our way to 4K. There is a playlist around here somewhere with all of my 21 Pilots related videos, a reaction to Trench, Clancy, Breach, all the singles. Definitely check those out if you are a fan of 21 Pilots related content. Links in the description to my Discord, my album of the year, my Twitter, and my other channels. Check those out if you haven't, and I will see you all whenever I next stream or upload. Bye bye.